Next we have Anita Puckett from Virginia Tech, whose title is Language Variation and the Pragmatics of Racial Language in the Upper South, a little different from what's on the program.
Okay, I think we're back to ethnicity here for a bit, and the idea of the term of ethnicity. So we have some handouts coming around. Please make sure you get one, because it's going to be kind of important. Okay. The resurgence and emergence of numerous heritage organizations and self-identifying ethnic groups in the Upper South in the last 15 to 20 years appears to represent processes of cultural and political devolution that assert or reassert ethnic boundaries. That's what it looks like they're doing, at least from the outside. In creating external boundaries, they also reveal underlying and overt language-based processes for the construction of racial categories that are inherent in the assertion of ethnicity, although we can debate about that. Knowing how these groups and boundaries are linguistically constituted therefore reveals a great deal about how racial categories continue to be reproduced in this region and the United States in general. Therefore, the central issue that I'm beginning to look at in my research is how do these language-based reproductions construct two and only two major categories of race, and that is white and non-white in the United States. I really want to try to unpack why it keeps ending up being binary. The various terms that denote some of these groups include, of course, Native American identifiers such as Monacan, and mixed heritage identifiers such as Melungeons. And you know, for those of you who may not know, Melungeons are this mixed heritage, mixed race group of Southwest Virginia and East Tennessee primarily. And there's the Guineas and the Carmel Indians, who are also included. They include them as well in their sense of groupness. And then of newly coined identifiers such as Afro-Latino. Now, these terms exist in contrast to well-established, historically supported self-identifiers such as Scotch or Scots-Irish, Black or African-American, and we can play with that one. And such things as country or Virginian or North Carolinian or as an Alabaman or Alabamian, I think that's on the table. All of these autonyms in turn coexist with various non-indigenous derogatory exonyms or outsiders terms such as hillbilly and redneck and for some Melungeon. Now associated with those networks and groups denoted by the autonyms, that is the names for their self-naming labels, are visible conscious efforts to constitute group internal cohesion and group external cleavage or separation. You're with us or you're not. Central to these processes of definition and distinction are the establishment of rights to authentically or appropriately use an ethnonym, and that means the name of a people. Now, depending upon the group, these rights may be closely or loosely monitored. In all cases, however, the proper noun referencing the group has value. And by value, I mean that the ethnonym is used in ways that contrast meaningful differences between it and other ethnonyms that infuse the noun with significant importance or even political economic worth. At least in my field of linguistic anthropology, we're turning in that direction. And in this presentation, I assert that how ethnonyms are valued in actual verbal exchanges provides the means for empirically ascertaining what these values are and their political, economic, and social significance, especially with respect to the continued construction of race as a major cultural category. Now, when I say how ethnonyms are valued, I do not mean that they necessarily must be present in a discursive event with the rest of the speech to receive their worth or value. As Irvine, and she keeps popping up today, as Irvine has argued, certain conventional or patterned ways of using language indexically, that is, point to interlocutors' memories and other patterns of speaking, if not entire speaking practices, which may or may not be co-present in the communicative event. Furthermore, the Peircean semiotic model of language and culture relations developed most fully by Silverstein argues for an indexical system of semantic or pragmatic entailments or presuppositions, they're sometimes called, in which a linguistic token necessarily links to other linguistic forms. Now, these systems of entailments are often hierarchical in structure, so that an utterance by a woman in the area I know best of southeastern Kentucky, a woman in a public place to a man that says, "Don't do that," indexically entails a larger category of orders, and in many southern Appalachian communities, and that can result in entail a set of verbal and nonverbal behaviors that can be interpreted as highly negative, leading to a miscommunication or a hostile interaction. Now, significant in taking this theoretical orientation is the observation that a single verbal exchange is rarely, if ever, discursively autonomous. It's always uttered and understood within the larger context of speaking practices, speech acts, conversational patterns, ritualized speech, and other forms of organizing talk into social behavioral units. Now, by focusing ethnographically, where we're looking at everything and how these different discursive forms and events entail each other in form, function, and interpretation, the researcher can then infer ways in which language constitutes the power, prestige, and privilege. And this is what I am trying to do in the process for those who call themselves in the area where I'm working, and I'm working in the New River Valley of Virginia, where I'm at, in Montgomery County, Virginia, and up into the surrounding counties, also in Southwest Virginia and far southeastern Kentucky, and now recently down in a bit into York County, South Carolina. And these are leading me to the labels of Scotch-Irish, Melungeon, Monacan, and Black, at least as Black is being used in the New River Valley. Specifically, I'm focusing on a practice common to all groups, which many of us know about, that of reckoning genealogical or kinship relationships. In all cases, kinship and genealogical discourse serves to define group membership in many, many ways, and therefore rights to use the identifier for the group as referencing oneself. So you can say, I'm Melungeon, I'm Scots-Irish, and so on. Nevertheless, the structuring of the discursive practices as well as pragmatic and semantic meanings signified by their use vary significantly from group to group. The identifier Scotch-Irish, for example, is especially well defined in the Upper South discursive practices. Heritage groups at the community level, festivals, websites, listservs, college centers, courses, programs, documentaries, substantial body of scholarly material, all of this, they're out there everywhere, it seems, coexist with oral discursive practices in both private and public settings. The Scotch-Irish Society of the United States serves as an official organization for the preservation and development of Scotch-Irish history and culture in the United States. It has strong genealogical archive. It has a journal, it's linked to the Journal of Scotch-Irish Studies. And we have President Jimmy Carter affirming Scotch-Irish heritage. We have historically, they like to claim Andrew Jackson, Thomas Mellon, and many others who have extreme political, very high political importance and very high international visibility. And therefore multiple venues where white power, prestige, and privilege are most fully developed and broad. Now, Scotch-Irish genealogical speaking practices in the southern uplands are varied and fully developed, encompassing all of these things, oral, written, electronic, and telephone mediums. But two basic criteria motivate the construction of these discursive genealogical practices: having an ancestor with a homeland in Ulster, Northern Ireland, or perhaps Scotland, and secondly, being able to trace the genealogy of this ancestor in lines or family trees, in which tracing the connections among the various blood relatives as individuals, usually male, is paramount. Now on your handout, examples 1 to 3 capture the complexities of this system a bit, just scratching the surface and reproducing the core elements of it. The first example comes from an article, a recent article in the Journal of Scotch-Irish Studies by Harold Alexander, where he's attempting to look at what makes up Scotch-Irish identity. And in the fourth column, you'll see he mentions things that I'm talking about: family history and traditions, oral history, family traditions, documented genealogy, and undocumented genealogy. Now, the other reason why I included this, one is this is a schematic of what constitutes their identity in his analysis, and secondly is this in a very, very metaphorical way captures this notion of entailment, except that we have to have cross-linkages and intextualizations and all kinds of other ways of merging these into a common speech community. But here, this idea of a hierarchy here is also helpful to understand this idea of entailment.